Triumphal Arch. My name is Daniel Vallis from InformedChristians.com, a website ministry devoted to discerning current events from a Christian and biblical perspective. This is a warning, but it is not a prediction. I do not know the future. But I can show you what is going on right now and what is on our radar, and we can make some guesstimate about that as we gain an understanding of the times. And when we have an understanding of the times, then we will know what we should be doing. Yesterday we talked about the latest Google Doodle, and I love reading the comments and feedback that people have because everybody sees something different, and it's nice to hear the different contributions that people add to our exploration and our watching at this time. Several people mentioned the concept of seeing the ideas of Janus and Juno in here, which the enemy has also referenced before, and it is interesting with the allusion to the water barrier and water as time too as well, so that does appear to be there as well. And then others mentioned that the middle O fades off toward the bottom, which the others don't. So it seems to be very reminiscent and suggestive of another archway, another gateway. So again, I just love your comments, and we can all watch together. The enemy knows what time it is, and they are reminding their disciples of what time it is and what is coming, what is waiting at the gates. The enemy is waiting at the gates, and they expect the son of perdition to come through any day now, as soon as he is unrestrained. And we've been looking at a lot of different signs and information, drawing our attention toward this time. We've been looking at broad signs for the past months, and they've been getting more and more specific, drawing our attention ever closer, and our attention and the detail has even been getting more granular. It's been getting more specific, with the celestial signs lining up with the prophetic signs and the biblical signs. And it's also interesting to note how the enemy messaging is lining up with the biblical calendar that we've been going by and examining, because they know what time it is too. And they've been messaging because they know the importance of the prophetic time that it points to. And they've even been making allusions to the celestial clock on the specific dates that line up with the biblical calendar too as well. Now, I have just uploaded a new updated version of the large timeline, so definitely check it out, study it for your homework. I do want to note I did have to make one adjustment on the rabbinical calendar line. It was off by 1 day, somehow it got shifted, but it is now correct and double checked it. But then we've been making several other changes as more information comes in on historical dates and biblical dates and shadows and patterns and even the celestial signs in the days ahead. So there are some differences from the previous version. So definitely download it and study it and check it out. Right now it is between May 7th and 8th and day 1 on the biblical month 3 and on the rabbinical calendar the 29th. And yesterday, people had commented that there were other historical incidences at the same time as well. We talked about the 3 ships, but people pointed out that the Hindenburg, that had its very significant and notable crash on May 6th, and the Lusitania sank on the 7th today, which was very instrumental in getting the United States into war. So right now I'm going to walk you through and point out several of the new changes and adjustments that were made on the latest radar update. The bottom line, of course, is the biblical calendar. And if you do check it against, for example, TORAHcalendar.com or TORAHtimes.com, you'll notice that ours is slightly different. That's because we do take into account the new moon sightings, which added an extra day to the last month. So that's why our biblical calendar is off by 1 day compared to some that do automatic calculation. And those are really just for approximation anyway. We still should rely on the new moon sightings in conjunction with those calendaring methods. And then today is the first of the 3rd month on the biblical calendar. The new moon was sighted today. Now, I do not follow the teachings of this website, but I do use it as a second witness because they live in Israel and I do not. And they have a very good network of witnesses that can help confirm the new moon sightings. So the new moon sighting was today. So today is the first of the 3rd month. And you do need to keep that into account when looking at TORAH calendar as well. Just keep in mind that their calendar is off. It's very close, but it's off because they are not taking into account the new moon sightings. I have seen them do it before, so I'm kind of surprised they haven't done it recently, but just keep that in mind that there is going to be a slight difference from other calendars like that. Now, Pentecost is going to be on the 14th, 15th on the Gregorian calendar at the earliest calculation for Pentecost. I do want to stress that. Depending on how you interpret it, and there are about 3 different interpretations, the 14th, 15th would be the earliest some who start to count after unleavened bread, Pentecost would be pushed back a week. But keep in mind, Pentecost is not affected by the new moon sightings anyway because it's done by a pure 50 count from the original day. The date may change on the calendar, but it'll always be 50 days out. So for us on our Gregorian calendar, which is fixed, it's the 14th, 15th. Now this coming Monday, the 9th, is very important because there's going to be the Russian Victory Day in Red Square, and several people are wondering if this has importance and tie in with a lot of the other messaging we've seen with red. It does seem to be significant, especially with the timing, so we are keeping our eye on that, and the fact that it falls on that day is very interesting as well. Now the 9th is also significant because that is the day that Jupiter, which we've been watching a lot, that is when it will end its retrograde motion. And I had mentioned before that my previous calculations were done just visually in Stellarium. I hadn't found a specific site that gave me the definitive dates, but I finally found one, and it mentioned that it will officially end its retrograde motion on the 9th. So that is when it will start station 2. And that's basically visually when it starts to switch its motion, starts going eastward again in the sky, but it'll appear to pause for about a week or so in that spot. So visually, as a sign in the heavens, it's very important because it appears to stop and stay there. So it definitely draws your attention if you are watching it over time. So on the 9th is when it stops its retrograde motion and is going to start officially departing Leo. It's going to start on the path to depart Leo. It won't finally exit till about mid-July, but the 9th is when it's going to start station 2. And Earth Sky has a whole article about it. And starting on May 9th, Jupiter will be moving eastward along the ecliptic again, going away from the Regulus, the brightest star in the constellation Leo. But you probably won't discern much, if any, movement of Jupiter in front of the star background for the next week or two around this time. And the same, starting on May 9th, Jupiter's basically going to stop for over a week, just visually appear to stop and stay at that point relative to the other stars. So this is an important sign in the heaven, with Jupiter basically stopping for about a week or so before it starts to depart. And the 9th kicks that off. But also on the 9th is the Mercury-Sun transit. And this is getting a lot of attention in social media and science, news, online as well, calling attention to it because it's kind of rare and unique. The transit of Mercury on Monday, May 9th. The transit is when the smallest, speediest planet particularly eclipses the Sun. And it's kind of rare. But this next part is important. A Mercury transit cannot be seen without a telescope. And it can't be an ordinary telescope. It has to be equipped with a safe solar filter. Now Mercury is really small, and so going in front of the Sun, they're definitely emphasizing the average person is not going to be able to see this. Astronomy clubs will see it. SLO is streaming online, their telescope version of it. So people will be able to see it, and it is getting a lot of attention, but at its core, it is a celestial marker that is also being seen. And the fact that two celestial events and celestial markers are taking place, one very visible and the one not as visible but very notable and getting a lot of notoriety at this time as well, both on the same day, right in between very important dates that we've been looking at, right between Ascension and prophetic events relating to Israel and also Pentecost. So again, we do not know the future, but we see that the days ahead are very important. And we know that the Lord has called our attention to this point. And all the enemy messaging, they're getting their disciples ready too. Our attention has been called to this time. The celestial signs are still going on. And it needs to catch our attention that the major sign we have been watching in the heavens, Jupiter and Judah the Lion, for weeks and months now even, along with the other celestial signs in conjunction with it, the fact that it's having one of the most significant signs of its circuit is happening on the 9th. And that is marking the beginning of a transition too as well. So the days ahead are going to be very important. And we must be sober, we must be vigilant and not let our guard down and still pay attention and be watching. And that goes back to the idea of watching. Just today, consider the idea of the new moon being sighted. That involves watching. That's why Christ wants us to watch, because there's a lot that we miss when we're not watching. And just the events of today and over the next few days involve watching. The new moon sighting, Jupiter stopping in the heavens, Mercury Sun transit. Christ has called our attention to this time. We have heard the trumpet calls at midnight, so we are making ourselves ready. We have heard the bridegroom coming. We know he is nigh even at the doors, so we are rising up, going out to meet him. It's still dark out in the world. It's near midnight. But we're going out looking for him, which means we are watching and we're looking eagerly for him. And we're going to find him somewhere halfway around here somewhere. We still have very high expectation. So let us rise up, shine bright, and still continue watching. Now, a very, very significant event happening in just a few days is Israel will be observing their Independence Day. And this definitely has prophetic overtones. Now, they are observing it on the 12th. That's when they are observing it and commemorating it. But the actual historical date on the Gregorian calendar was May 14th. And we've talked before about the importance of the generations, and we have links in the description box about all this information. And we've talked about the celestial sign of Jupiter in Judah the Lion and how it coincides with this last generation, and how this last year that we were already expecting years ago, that Judah the Lion sign appears at this exact same time, finishing it out. And we talked about how the lineup lines up perfectly with the biblical calendar that we've been looking at. So we know this time is very important, tied to the historical marker that Jesus gave his disciples. He told them when this historical event happens, you know it's a countdown from that point. And within the generation and the lifespan that witnessed that event, all these other events, which include the tribulation, all that will happen. And we have a whole poster about the fig tree metaphor and the rebirth of Israel. Israel has a long way to go still. They still have a long way to go, obviously. God still has a lot of work to do in them, but they had started budding and growing, but they still have a lot more work to go through. But it was a historical marker that God was pointing to. And we also have our poster, The Last Generation, that breaks it down with a lot of the prophetic signs, over 40, that happened in this window of time that God said would happen and would describe the last days, how it came to pass within this last generation. We know we are in the last generation. And that means there's also a time frame and a limit, which we put this poster together 4 years ago. And the Lord gave a lot of wisdom. And 4 years ago, we had it ending at this next week from where we are today. I do not know the future. By looking at the prophetic signs and prophecy and what it told us to look for with the time frames and when we should be looking and what we should be looking for with the events that happen in there and even the celestial signs, we should not be surprised that we arrive at this conclusion and this very important time in just the days and hours ahead of us, because we're looking at it from a biblical perspective. We already knew what to look for because we looked into God's Word. And the closer we got, the more confirmation he gave us. Just like he said, when you see all these things come to pass, lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. And when we lift up our heads, we see celestial signs above us that are very important, nailing down more specifically the time frame and countdown that we're at right now. So their Independence Day in 1948 was on May 14th, but we have to keep in mind that was the Gregorian calendar date, and that does not line up with the Jewish calendar. That was the day that happened to correspond with the Jewish calendar that year. But they celebrated on the 5th of their second month. Israel's Independence Day is celebrated either on the 5th of Iyar, according to the Hebrew calendar, or on one of the preceding or following days, depending on which day of the week this date falls on. So they'll normally celebrate it on the day, but if it conflicts with Sabbath days and etc., they'll do it on the day before or day after. And notice that the corresponding Gregorian date at that time was the 14th of May, 1948. And they're commemorating it this year on the 12th of May, which will be their 4th, just to avoid the Sabbath. So normally it's on the 5th on their calendar, but they are observing it on the 4th this year, which falls out on the 12th. And for the Independence Day, they actually start the observances in the evening of the day before, so technically it does start on the 11th, their commemoration of it. But looking at it from a prophetic and biblical point of view, we want to find out the date of when it fits on the calendar, God's calendar. Now, according to TORAHcalendar.com, going back to 1948, the corresponding biblical calendar date would have been the 4th on the 3rd month, which is where we find ourselves shortly at. And that would correspond to May 10th and 11th, which would be the day right after the celestial events on the 9th. And we see a lot of significance with the celestial signs calling our attention to this time, and then hours later, another prophetic event of high importance is transpiring as well. Right in the midst of the time of Station 2 as well, when Jupiter is pausing visibly at this point in time. The celestial signs are calling our attention to this time, and even the very importance of the events happening in the hours ahead are calling our attention to this time. And we've seen with a lot of the enemy messaging that they are getting ready for sudden destruction. And even the Bible has told us that with the warnings we've seen already. Sudden destruction is coming. And some very significant events appear to happen that will relate to Israel and also a large part of the world as well. Now, this stamp was put out in 1955 on the 7th Independence Day of Israel. They put that emblem on there. Most people do not realize this, but this is the official emblem of the State of Israel, not the Star of Remphan. The menorah is the official seal of Israel. And you'll sometimes see that on banners, even on Independence Day celebrations there in Israel. They'll have the official seal and emblem of Israel there. But this menorah looks familiar for some reason. That is because the image used on the emblem is based on a depiction of the menorah on the Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus. That rings some bells. And the engraving on the Triumphal Arch of Titus shows the looting of the temple, the looting of Jerusalem as well, by carrying off the menorah and the silver trumpets from the temple. The State of Israel, their very emblem, is on the Arch of Titus, the Triumphal Arch of Titus. Is there a reason we are seeing a lot of calls to triumphal arches, particularly the Arch of Titus, his triumphal arch? It's very suspicious that we find all these being messaged at this time, an arch that directly relates to the very emblem of the State of Israel, right when the enemy is giving a lot of warnings of sudden destruction and war, and that the son of perdition is about to come through the gates. And when we look back at just the 50 or so days of the enemy messaging that they've been giving out, and we look at all just the direct references to gates and gateways, with several of them direct references to the Arch of Titus. The enemy is warning that some events are coming that are tied to the Arch of Titus, a triumphal entry, and tied to the very subject that is even carved on the Arch of Titus. A nation of a very peculiar people. A nation whose very birth was prophesied in Scripture, and that we have been watching for many years, and now, at the end of the last generation, our attention is being drawn back to it. Again, I do not know the future, but from the celestial signs in the hours and days ahead, and from the prophetic commemorations in the days ahead, and the biblical shadow patterns that we are at right now and in the days ahead, we must be ready. Time is so short. While we do not know the future, we do know what we should be doing right now. As the servants of Christ, we must wait on the Lord. Look to Him for wisdom and direction of what you should be doing right now. Now is when we trim our lamps. Now is when we cast off the works of darkness. Now is when we put on the armor of light, so that Christ can see Himself in us shining brightly. The world can see Christ in us, and that we are living for things of eternity, getting ready for our beloved, our Redeemer. We will wait patiently. We will watch patiently. And we will make sure we are ready. Serve Christ first and highest above all else. Maranatha.